Good afternoon. My name is David Head and I'm Chief Executive at Hemochromatosis UK. Thanks very much for inviting me along to speak. The title of my talk is The Celtic Curse, the most common condition you've never heard of. So, from the programme and the introduction, you know I'm from Haemochromatosis UK. We support people with hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis is a genetic condition that causes all sorts of problems, some of them potentially serious. It's also especially prevalent, in Irish people, which explains why I'm here today, and hence the term the Celtic Curse. So what I want to do in the next 15 minutes or so is tell you about hemochromatosis, explain a little bit more about the links to Ireland and a little bit about genetics to help with that. And I encourage you to spread the word about the Celtic Curse, hemochromatosis. I've also got a few slides, but don't worry, I'm not a medic, I'm not a scientist, so this should be understandable. So very quickly, could I ask, before you looked at the programme and saw the name of my organisation, and perhaps before you spoke to anyone here today, had any or many of you heard of hemochromatosis? Can you put your hand up if you had? Or know anyone affected? Or if you're willing to put your hand up, is anyone here affected? Okay, just a handful. It's interesting, although not surprising, especially when you consider that hemochromatosis is the most common genetic condition in people from Northern Europe and is most common of all in people from Ireland and within the Irish diaspora. And I refer, of course, to the island of Ireland, north and south. Anyway, let's go back to the basics. What is hemochromatosis? Genetic hemochromatosis. It's a condition whereby in an affected person, the body's mechanism to control the absorption of iron from food fails. Now, when it's working properly, this is a very finely balanced, a finely controlled process. So normally, when there's enough iron in your body to make red blood cells, your muscles, and do all the other good thing that iron does, no more is absorbed. If iron levels drop, the system for absorbing iron is then switched back on again. It's a bit like the thermostat in a room. Once there's enough heat, the heating process is turned off. Once the heat is lost or used, the heating process is turned back on again. So this is happening in our gut all the time, where all of the nutrients we need from our food are absorbed and transported around the body. So if someone has hemochromatosis, the iron absorption process, the system is stuck in the on position. So iron is being absorbed all the time, even when the body doesn't need it. It's a bit like having the thermostat stuck on heat, even when the room's already warm enough. Now there are two problems with this. Firstly, the body doesn't have a way of removing the iron, except in some very tiny amounts from the skin and through your feces. So it ends up getting stored in various places, especially in the liver. And the second problem is that iron is actually very toxic at high levels. Consequently, it poisons many of the body's systems, and this causes many problems. It builds up in the liver, most of all, and this causes fibrosis and then cirrhosis, and possibly even liver cancer. It poisons the heart muscles and causes cardiomyopathy. It affects the joints and causes pain, and then arthritis, joint failures. It poisons the pancreas, and this leads to diabetes. It poisons the thyroid, causing chronic fatigue. It poisons other glands, causing mental health problems, sexual health problems, skin problems, menstrual problems. It's also been associated with other diseases such as dementia and sight loss and various cancers, although at the moment there isn't the scientific evidence to prove those links. So what causes this? The underlying cause of this problem is genetic. For what it's worth, the failure of the iron control system is usually caused by a mutation called C282Y on the HFE gene. and this is where the Irish connection comes in. I'll come back to that, but first there are two more things I want to tell you about hemochromatosis. Firstly, it's vastly underdiagnosed because there's a general lack of awareness, even in the medical profession, of all the conditions and the range of problems it can cause. And all too often what we regard as a symptom becomes a diagnosis. Diabetes and depression are two very good examples of that. Doctors don't always identify the underlying cause, they just treat the symptom, for example with insulin or with antidepressants. Secondly, it's easily diagnosed, or it should be easily diagnosed, and it can be easily treated in most cases. The blood tests involved are inexpensive and easy for a GP to commission. Treatment is very simple too. The regular removal of blood, usually a pint at a time, much like giving a blood donation. The body then uses the stored iron that has been built up in the liver and then other places to make replacement red blood cells. So the process of removing iron overload is generally cheap, drug-free, proven, safe, simple, and has the bonus as well of providing blood supplies. We just need to make sure we do this before people suffer with organ and joint damage. Okay, all well and good. Now let's have a look at the Celtic, the Irish link. It's all about genetics, but what does that mean? Well, our genes are the building blocks for our bodies. The genes contain all the information and instructions that are needed for our body to develop and to function properly. Our DNA. Each gene is a length of DNA that codes part of that instruction manual. In our bodies, we have about 30,000 genes. One of them is the HFE gene, which is involved in setting up the instructions for the body's iron metabolism. I don't know what the other 29,999 genes do because I work for Hemochromatosis UK. We have a copy of each gene from each parent. So I have a copy of the HFE gene from my mum, and I have a copy of the HFE gene from my dad. We all do. However, when you consider that we have thousands and thousands of genes, and that our DNA consists of about 3 billion individual bits of information, we shouldn't be surprised when something goes wrong. One tiny change in one part of the gene can make the instructions incomplete, or turn the information into nonsense. These are what we call variants, or mutations of the gene. So let's say that a mutation occurs in an animal that means the colour of its fur changes very slightly. The instruction is faulty. It might be that as a result, that animal is less likely to be spotted by a predator. It could be better camouflaged. That means that it is much more likely to survive and to pass on the changed gene to its offspring. And the offspring have the lighter colour and survive better. The species has evolved to cope better with the environment. Let's say a fault occurs in a gene which controls the way that that animal's bones develop. As a result, perhaps it won't be able to run as fast. Consequently, it's more likely to get caught and eaten, and so less likely to pass on the faulty gene to offspring. You'll hear this type of scenario referred to as the survival of the fittest. It's evolution. So back to the Celts. It seems that many thousands of years ago, a mutation occurred from one generation to the next in the HFE gene. The mutation meant that the body's chemistry was altered very slightly, and that individual's process for controlling iron absorption failed, just as I described earlier. There is debate about whether the Vikings brought the mutation to Ireland, but recent discoveries of Bronze Age skeletons in Ireland have shown that the mutation was present on the island at least 4,000 years ago. At that time, life expectancy was perhaps 40 years at the most. Iron buildup is slow, and during this shorter lifespan would have confirmed an advantage to the people affected. They would have coped better with an iron-deficient diet, been less likely to experience anemias, and perhaps been physically stronger. Even now, athletes take iron supplements to boost red blood cell count and oxygen efficiency. Studies of French and Spanish elite athletes show that a much higher percentage of those subjects have a HFE mutation than the general population. So survival of the fittest would have meant that people with the mutation that cause iron overload would have been more likely to survive and produce children, multiplying the number of people with the mutation. Of course, it's only in recent years that we travel like we do, so this would have been contained within the communities and the island of Ireland. Nowadays, the Irish diaspora is spread around the world, and the mutation too as a result. In fact, according to the Irish Hemochromatosis Association, about 1 in 5 Irish people still carry the mutation. That is, they have one copy at least from mum or dad of the faulty gene. So the fault was beneficial. Why is it now a genetic disease? Well, that's simply because we all live longer. Consequently, the iron builds up over many years, going beyond being healthy and beneficial to becoming highly toxic and causing all the problems I described earlier. Liver disease, arthritis, cardiomyopathy, depression, and all that would not have been a concern to a 30-year-old Bronze Age man or woman. In general terms, in fact, our extended lifespans are causing problems further down the line, as we all know. We live longer, but suffer more medical problems as a result. And the Celtic Curse is a good example. Iron building up, continuing into a patient's 50s or 60s unchecked, is not a good thing. So we have a few key messages here as a result. Firstly, we do know, it is proven, that Irish people are more likely to be affected, and so you should all be aware of GH, genetic hemochromatosis. If you have symptoms, any of the symptoms I've described, then you should ask your doctor for the tests for iron overload. The tests are straightforward blood tests, and also, of course, genetic testing is available nowadays. And I think it's really important that everyone here, that you make sure you tell your friends and family about what I've told you today. This presentation is all about Irishness, which is a wonderful concept. Your pride in what you are and where you have come from is part of that character. But you do inherit the Celtic curse, and there needs to be more awareness of that. I really hope you found this talk interesting, and of course I would be very pleased to provide you with more information, or you can visit our website, which is www.untitled.com.